let's begin. Okay, I'm going to set a little alarm. I want to make sure I don't run out of time. So my little alarm, we'll do it for 50 minutes, and we'll just see how it goes. And so let's begin. So we're going to introduce a new idea, which I'm sure you have an idea about momentum. Momentum is basically a product of mass times velocity. I'll get my pen sorted out. And then let's go. So we have this thing called momentum. It is, you wouldn't invent it, you know. This is mass times velocity. So you simply take the number of kilograms and you multiply it by the meters per second. And it is simple as that. Why do we care about it? You know, we care about it because when you have a collision, it's conserved. It is the same before for both vehicles as it is after for both vehicles. Kinetic energy is not conserved in many collisions. You can hear them. There's a crash. So we like to work in equations. So we like things to be equal before and after. When you find something that's the same before as it is afterwards, we love it. So this is why we use momentum. We don't talk about it much in everyday life. We talk about having the momentum, which is you keep doing what you're doing, which is really, you know, having Newton's first law. It's, you know, it's kind of like, but we don't talk about it that much. So we say momentum equals mass times velocity. The symbol for momentum is not m, because we used it for mass. It's p. It doesn't matter that much. We ran out of letters a long time ago. P is equal to m times v. We don't need to know so much about this, but we could get involved in it. Momentum is a vector. It's got a direction. And so does velocity. But mass does not. And when you multiply a vector by a scalar, it's 3 times bigger or half as big or whatever. The scalar just scales it. So you get a vector. So momentum is a vector. So we say sometimes it's hard to appreciate the equivalence of situations that have the same momentum. So here's 3 examples that have the same momentum. If you had a 2-gram particle, that's like a tiny little wad of paper, and it was traveling at 4,000 meters per second. Imagine this thing's going really fast. It's like 2-kilogram object. That's going at 4 meters per second, 4 yards a second. It's still fast, which is like a 2,000 kilogram object going at 4 millimeters a second. This is like a bus that's crawling along, and this is like a grain of sand, well, not a grain of sand, but a grain of rice that's flying along like a bullet, you know? And they're the same. And I don't know what you feel about it. I don't feel they're the same, you know. I know I can get out of the way of a bus, you know, so I can't get out of the way of something going that fast. Well, that's not really fair, is it? The equivalence is that if they hit me, they have the same effect. Well, yeah, the grain of sand would probably go in one side of me and come out the other at that speed, whereas the bus would just squish me, so it's a bit difficult to appreciate the sameness of them, but from a physics point of view, they are equivalent. But objects with more momentum are harder to stop than objects with less momentum, and that's kind of what it's about. So let's do some. Which has more momentum? I'm using wacky units here. A 1-ton car at 100 kilometers per hour, or a 2-ton truck at 50 kilometers per hour. We just take the momentum equals the mass times the velocity, which equals 1 ton times 100, or it's 2 ton times 50. So what do you think? That equals 100, and that equals 100. So which would you say? I'm going to open up the clickers, and you can click away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We've got 11 people, just about. And it's going to be, come on, number 10. Come on. I'm going to stop it when we get to 30. Come on, number 11. I'm going to stop it when I get to 30. Here we go, last bids. Okay. And what we get in here. Yeah, they're the same. It's just you multiply. Wacky units, I'm just trying to get across. It's wacky units, doesn't matter. This would be, by the way, it would be ton, kilogram per hour, which is like the strangest unit. But they are the same, so they have the same value. Does a moving car have, an impulse? And does a moving car have momentum? Let's forget that second one for a second, and let's look at that. Does a moving car have momentum? Does a moving car have mass? Does a moving car have velocity? What do you think? Let's do this real quick. Yeah, 5, 6. Yeah, this is. So if it's got mass and it's moving, I'm going to go to 25. If it's got mass and it's moving, yes, it always has momentum. It's not maybe, it always has momentum. If you always have mass, if you have mass and you have a velocity, you have momentum. Always, that's the physics of it. So, fair enough. Okay. So, momentum, interesting new idea. Impulse, another interesting new idea. Impulse is the force times the duration. That's how long we apply a force for. Here's the issue. We've linked net force with acceleration. And we know acceleration means a change in speed. So if I have a positive acceleration, I've got a positive change in speed. My speed will get bigger and bigger and bigger, yeah? But how big it gets to depends on how long I have this acceleration for. So I've got to take time into account, and that's what impulse does. Impulse says, okay, let's take our force and multiply it by how long we apply that force for. I can imagine it as a graph, actually. Here's my force, and here's time. And I can imagine after a certain time I hit something, and I keep on hitting it, and keep on hitting it, and then I stop. And that area is a representation of the impulse. In truth, what happens in most cases, if I'm kicking a football, for example, I touch the ball, and then as my foot goes forward, it pushes harder and harder on the ball until the ball starts springing away. Now the ball starts springing away from me, and there's less and less contact until eventually there's no contact left. So in truth, if I look at a real interaction, it's not nice and square, but it's the same principle. That area underneath is the same impulse. So it's a way of sorting this out. What we say is if a force is applied for longer, then there is a bigger change in velocity. And if there is a bigger change in velocity, there's a bigger change in momentum. So we say impulse, symbol I, which equals force times the duration is your change in time. Well, impulse is actually equal to change in momentum. So impulse equals not momentum, but change in momentum. I can prove that to you, but let me show you how. So impulse is equals force times time, and force is mass times acceleration. So impulse is kilogram meters per second squared. That's mass times acceleration times seconds, which equals kilogram meters per second. Force times time. And momentum is mass times velocity, which is kilograms meters per second. It's changing, but it still has the same units, yeah? 5 meters minus 2 meters is still 3 meters. The units don't go away, just the numbers change. So that on one side is the same as that on the other side. And there's a rule in physics that if it's got the same units, it's the same thing. We really say same dimensions, but it's basically the same units. So these guys are equal. And there's the thing about equal signs. The numbers on both sides of an equal sign have to be the same, but so do the units. You can't say 5 tanks equals 5 bananas. It don't work out. Tanks are not the same as bananas. So just equal signs are really powerful. So we say whenever you exert a force on something, you also exert an impulse because it happens for a time. You can try and minimize the amount of time, but you can't make it zero. So the result is acceleration depends upon the net force, but the resulting change in momentum depends upon the impulse, which is the net force times the duration. So we have the force times the duration is equal to my change in momentum, which is my mass times my change in velocity. So my force times my change in time is like my mass times my change in velocity. You see the pattern there? It's kind of interesting. So let me go back because I skipped a question. So does a moving car have impulse? That's an interesting question. I'm going to let it ride and see what we say. It's an interesting question. Does a moving car have impulse? Moving car certainly has momentum, but does it have an impulse? Yeah, this is an interesting question. So I got almost 11 people, 12 people. So let's stop it on 30. I think there's 13 of us now. Let's stop it on 30. Yeah, okay. Let's see what people say. Ooh. I always like it when it's like this. Comment or question?
Oh, I just said, can I explain my answer?
Yeah, please. That'd be great.
Sometimes, because if the car's not accelerating,
yeah.
use the muzzle.
Very well done. Yeah. So the trick is that, yeah, it's like impulse is equal to change in momentum, which equals momentum final minus the momentum initial, P final minus P initial, which equals M times V final minus V initial. So if there's not a change in speed, there's not a change in momentum. And if there's not a change in momentum, there's not an impulse. Yeah? So sometimes you change speed, and there is an impulse, but sometimes you coast at the same speed and there's no impulse. So that's an interesting one. The answer is sometimes, because you can move at constant speed and you don't get a change in momentum, so you don't get an impulse, but sometimes you speed up or slow down and there is an impulse. Can you see how it's a bit more involved? Its impulse equals change in momentum, not just momentum. So that's an interesting question. Which has more impulse, a 50 Newton force acting for 20 seconds or a 20 Newton force acting for 50 seconds? So what do you think? Let me, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my stuff today. So 50 acting for 20 or a 20 acting for 50? I think I just gave it away, didn't I? So let's go up to 30 seconds. What do you think? Yep, let's have a go. Boom. Most people saying C, which is they have the same. And let's have a look. If impulse is equal to force times delta T, then it would be 50 literally times 20, or it would be 20 literally times 50. In either case, you have 100, and it would be Newton seconds. That's the unit for it, Newton seconds. So they have the same impulse. So what about this next one, which has more impulse? These are not going to be the same unless I really messed up. So what do you think to these guys? We have 5 for 2, 2 for 6, 6 for 8, 6 for 3, 3 for 2, 2 for 5. Just getting you to do a whole bunch of calculations. You can kind of see it, can't you, when you just look at the magnitude of the numbers. We'll stop at 30. Cool. Yeah, let's have a look. Yeah, it's you can kind of see it, but if you can't see it, you've got to just do the work. So you'd say for this it will be 5 times 2, which is 10 Newton seconds, and for the next one it will be 2 times 6, which is 12 Newton seconds. Next one is 18 Newton seconds, then 6 Newton seconds, and then 10 Newton seconds. So it's number C. C is the answer. I can mess with that, of course. I can give you wacky information. I can say a force acts for 2 seconds. A 5 Newton force acts for 2 seconds on a 7 kilogram car. Do you ignore the 7 or do you use it? And you've got to know, impulse is force times duration, so I don't need to worry about the mass. So I sometimes give you extra information. Yes?
Wouldn't that be 1,000 newtons per second? 50 times 20?
Oh, the other one, let's look, 57. Yeah, well done. Thank you. I'd love to say it was a deliberate mistake, but it wasn't.
Just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing
No, you're right. No, you're right. Good to stop me. That was the kind of thing where in college it would keep me, when I was a student, would keep me there for hours. Because I'd try and think, what have I done wrong? What am I missing? And there was nothing. So impulse changes momentum. So impulse equals force times time, duration really, which is my change in momentum, which is my mass times my change in velocity. And we kind of have a feel for this. If you want a faster tennis serve, you're doing tennis, you want to make the ball go faster towards your opponent, you want to change the velocity by the maximum amount. So you want the biggest change in momentum, which means you want the biggest impulse. So yeah, you go to the gym and you work out to get stronger, but on any given day, you can't change how strong you are, but you can change how long you push for. So you try and keep your pushing force in contact with the ball for as long as possible. And that's what tennis coaches call following through. Same with golf, you follow through. You don't jab at it, you follow through. And that's maintaining the time of contact with the ball for as long as possible. So we say if you want a faster tennis serve, you need more change in momentum, so you need more impulse, so you need more force and more duration. And it's the more duration that's the interesting thing on any given day. So we follow through. We get strong, yeah, we work out, but we follow through. That's what we do. And sometimes a tennis player wants to just kill the ball, and they just jab at it. You know, they just jab, and they kind of like try and just drop it over the net. They got to hit it, but they certainly don't follow through to get it over the net. If they're stood at the net, they jab at it. They just try and jab it. You know, not following through. If you want to reduce pain in a car crash, what are you going to do? Well, I got a certain change in momentum. Me and my car are traveling at 60 miles an hour, and we're going to stop. There's nothing I can do about the change in momentum. I suppose I can try to avoid stopping, but in a car crash, I'm going to stop. So I can't do anything about my change in momentum. So I look at my impulse side, and I say, well, I'm going to have a certain force times time, force times duration. I guess I can reduce my force if I increase my duration. So let's put a cushion between me and that steering wheel so that I start slowing down when my nose touches the cushion. And then over a period of time, I come to a stop. The car might be stopping quite quickly, but I'm trying not to. So I use an airbag. It's kind of like, so if you want to reduce pain in a car crash, you cannot reduce the change in momentum because you're going to stop, but you can reduce the force causing that change by extending the duration of the force. Employ a car with crumple zones. They design crumple zones in. I remember, and airbags. I remember when I was a kid, when I was in school, my dad got a car. He was 50. He'd never driven in his life. He was raised at a time. His dad and his brother, his dad never took a driver's test in his life. Because when he started to drive, you didn't need driver's tests. They just said, there's a car, get on. There's no traffic, basically. So, and then he was my grandfather was grandfathered in. He never needed to take a driver's test. And sometimes it showed, actually. But my dad came along at 50, an older gentleman, slower reactions. Never passed his driver's test. He took it a number of times. He died of a heart attack in his early 50s, but he never actually passed his driver's test. And I understand, it was like if I was a driving inspector in Britain, in a busy city, and I saw an older gentleman coming who was a bit hesitant, because my dad was a bit hesitant. It's that, that confidence. Can you keep up with traffic? Are you confident to sign off on that person? And so I understood my dad, the level, the bar was a bit higher from my dad than it was for the kid over the street who was like 17 who passed first time. And it broke my dad's heart that, he started learning to drive before the kid did, and the kid kind of 10 lessons and he was through, and he was like, my dad had been there for like a year trying to pass. But the 17-year-old don't really think about it. They just get in the car and drive, So, okay. So I inherited my dad's car. And I was like, oh, man. Actually, I inherited my dad's car. How old was I? No, I wasn't in school. I was like in college when I inherited my dad's car. I was actually 24 when I learned to drive. It'd been in the garage for a while, but I've probably been in the garage for 4 years. No one using it, I couldn't afford to drive, and again, couldn't afford the lessons, etc. So anyway, I inherited this car, and when I was a bit younger, when I was in high school, I remember thinking, if I got a car, I would just put a big girder around the car, and then if I just hit something, my car's protected. Why on earth don't they just put a big girder around the car so we can, you look at all these cars, they've always got crinkled bodywork and the like. That's like incredible. Why do you just put a big girder around the thing, then you won't have any crinkled bodywork? And the answer is because they'd sooner have the bodywork damaged than you. Because if they put you inside, let's say you're an egg and you're inside a car, let's say a coffee can, and we just stop the coffee can suddenly, what happens to the egg? The egg smashes, and that's the end of you as we know you. I mean, it's like you're done. So the idea behind crinkle zones is not just to make you pay a lot if you're in a little fender bender, which I thought it was, it's to save your life. I mean, that's what it's about. By that crinkle zone, it deliberately slows down the interaction rather than hitting and bouncing off. It takes time to crinkle the rear end of your car. And so there's less force, more duration. So we employ crumple zones and airbag. And then if you want to maximize the pain of, so this is the violent side of physics, I apologize to this, but if you want to maximize the pain of a blow, what do? If I want to get you out of the way, I will push you. and I'll keep on pushing you. That's what you do, isn't it? You go up to somebody and you push and push and push and push, and eventually they're out of the door. If I want to hurt them, I do something completely different. I jab at them. I thump them or I jab at them. And so there's this, for my generation, martial arts came in quite late, and there was the chop. And you'd see it in spy movies. All the spies knew how to do martial arts, and the rest of us didn't know what they were doing. And it seems ridiculous, You hit somebody with the side of your hand rather than your fist. That must be just completely nonsense. But it's this idea about I can bounce my hand off of something. I reduce, well, I do two things actually. I reduce my time of contact, and I also, by bouncing my hand off, think about it, I have a mass going in that direction. There's, somebody who's going to be unhappy in a minute. If I just hit it there and stop, there's a certain change in momentum. There's a mass, the final velocity is 0, and the initial velocity, let's say, is minus plus 2. So it would be minus 2m would be the momentum change. But if I take that same thing and I bounce it off, I deliberately kind of bounce it, then it's a weird thing happens. My momentum change is minus 2 minus plus 2, because I bounce back with the same speed I hit. And that equals minus 4m for the momentum change. I double my momentum change for bouncing something. Twice as much change in momentum means twice as much impulse. And if I, at the same time, I'd have twice the force, but I'd minimize my time as well. So I get to the stage by jabbing at something, I can create a big force for a short period of time. And that can be used to crack brittle things like concrete and wood and the like. You can do it. So it's kind of very clever. If I want to move you out of the way, I'll push for a long time. If I want to hurt or crack, I will jab at something. Very different technique, all explainable by the physics of the situation. Yeah, okay. There was a little piece of information I wanted to get to, and I wasn't sure if it was there. So let's do this. 10 Newton force acts for 4 seconds. It causes a 5 kilogram block to change its speed from 0 to 8 meters per second. A lot of information on this one. What was the impulse of the force? So from that information, you have to pick out the stuff that's going to give you the impulse. So what do you think? So do I use the force? Do I use the duration? Do I use the mass? Do I use the final and initial speed? What's going on? So what do you think? I'll let it go for just a few more seconds. Stop it. Okay. Let's have a look. Everybody's saying 40 Newton seconds. Let's have a look. Impulse. So impulse is equal to force times the duration, which equals, well, it's 10 for the force, and the duration is 4, which equals 40 Newton seconds. Agreed? What about this next bit? What was the change in the momentum? You can get it from raw information, or you can get it from your last answer. So let's go for 30 seconds. So what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Stop in 3, 2, 1, stop. Yeah, let's have a look. So, a bit more choice here. So mainly people are saying D, but a little bit of A and B. So let's have a look. Well, there's several ways of doing this. You can say that impulse is equal to change in momentum, which equals 40, and the units, well, kilogram meters per second. If impulse equals change in momentum, and that's my change in momentum, and then that's my impulse, then that's my change in momentum. The other way is, okay, impulse is equal to my change in momentum, which equals the change, well, my P final minus P initial, which equals my mass times V final minus my mass times V initial, which equals my mass times V final minus V initial, if you like. They're all ways of saying the same thing. I look up here and I go, well, the mass was 5, and my final speed was 8, and my initial speed was 0. So that's going to be 5 times 8, which equals 40, and it's going to be kilogram meters per second. So there we go. Same thing. Cool. A force causes a block's momentum to change by 4 kilogram meters per second. What was the impulse caused by this force? I'm going to do this one. So a force, so here's my force, causes a block's momentum. So we have V initial, and then somewhere down here, later on, we have V final. To change by, so delta P is equal to 4 kilogram meters per second. So what is the impulse? Now, if you're trying to use impulse is equal to force times delta T, then you don't have any information. But if I use impulse is equal to change in momentum, 4 Newton seconds. Oh, there's no letters on this. So, first one. Do you see where that comes from? So, can you ever go to the second one for me, please? Let's just practice this. So, for the second one, a force acts on a block, creating an impulse of 9 Newton seconds. What was the block's change in momentum? This will be quick. This is going to be... I'll stop you at 30 again. Let's have a look. Yeah, solidly everybody's saying B, because, yeah, now we know that impulse is equal to change in momentum. So if my impulse equals 9 Newton seconds, my change in momentum equals 9 kilogram meters per second. Same thing, yeah? Cool. And then a force that acts on a block creates an impulse of 9 Newton seconds if the block's original momentum, this is even a bit more interesting. So if the block's original momentum was 4 kilogram meters per second, what is the block's new momentum? Now, the force and the momentum, I'm saying, and the original momentum in the same direction. That's a little cadre I've got to put in. So here you go in, and this is your V initial, and your force is in the same direction. I can mess you up if I put it in the opposite direction, but I wouldn't do that. So later on, you got the same force, but you got a V final. So this is a bit more involved. I'll stop you at 50, because most of you just jumped on it. Most people saying C, a couple of B's. Let's have a quick look. I don't know what the answer is, but let's have a quick look. So let's have a look. So I'm just going to go. Impulse is equal to change in momentum, which equals P final minus P initial. Okay. Impulse was 9, is equal to P final is what I want, minus 4. 9 plus 4 is equal to P final. Just take that 4 to the other side. So that must equal 13, I think it is. And it's going to be 13 kilogram meters per second. There it is. Yep. Cool. Cool. So I mentioned this earlier, but I want to mention it again because it's kind of interesting. So my wife was married before she got divorced, but she was married once before she married me. And she married into a family, and there was, when I first met her, she was still very close friends with her mother-in-law, which was a little bit disconcerting because, kind of like, hold on, didn't you leave that family behind? She goes, no, I think the world of her, Okay. And so she started telling me bits and pieces about, the marriage and also about the family, By the time that I married my wife, both my parents were dead, so she had no in-laws on my side. She had, my brother and his family. And one day she said to me, her father-in-law was he was a math professor. And she said he taught her the most amazing thing because she was hammering. And so she was trying to put up some picture frames. And so she had the nail, and she didn't want to damage the wall. So she took the hammer, and she carefully moved it away from the nail. And she kind of went like that. And she kind of stopped. She was a bit scared about just, swinging down and damaging the wall there. So she was like, really careful. It was taking forever. It was not going very far. And the guy said, no, stop it. And she said that he got the hammer and he just whacked it. And he bounced the hammer off. And the nail just flew in. And she said it kind of a bit shocking. She'd been, hitting quite hard, but stopping on the nail. Then she bounced the hammer off. He got her to bounce the hammer off. And the nail just flew in. Because in bouncing, if it's symmetrical, if you leave with the same velocity you arrived with in the opposite direction, you double the force. So it's kind of interesting. So if you hammer a nail into a wall and stop the hammer at the nail, you create less impulse than if you bounce the hammer off the nail. The impulse required to stop an object is less than the impulse required to bounce it back. Yeah? Bouncing back involves more momentum. And you kind of know that, actually. If a ball's coming towards you, say in soccer, and you want to just drop it to your feet, if you're the goalie, you just kind of drop it to your feet. Or if a player, you can chest the ball down. If you try and, I'm going to aim it back at the person, imagine the force you'd need to do to chest the ball back at the person who just hit it at you. It would take a lot more force, twice as much force to bounce it back at them. So bouncing back involves more change in energy. And here's the kind of like the story about the gold rush in California. All these people came to California to find their fortune, and what they did was they moved there, and then they said, how do I do this? And they were told, well, you get a pan, and you go to a stream, and you pick up some of the gravel, and you swirl it, and heavier bits like the stones get left behind, and the lighter bits go away, and among those stones there might be one that glints a bit, and that's gold. And if you're lucky, you'll get one piece of gold and you can retire. And if you're not lucky, you're going to be here for a long time and maybe not get anything. But everybody, we are amazingly optimistic species. I'm going off subject a little bit, but I bought a raffle ticket, a lottery ticket once, because I decided that if fate decided that I was going to be a billionaire, I was only going to give it one chance. It either happened or it didn't. Oh, it didn't happen. I'm never going to worry about that again. And I know people, and they buy lottery tickets all the time, and they say, hey, I'm increasing my chances. And they are. I know they are. I'm not, I know they are. But I'm still amazed at when you look at the odds. I mean, I don't want to do it, so I'm kind of playing a game with myself. I will increase my odds. I might win it on the second try, but I'm just not going to play that game. But I know people who play and play and play and play. And my buddy, who's the biology teacher at my old school, would not get a lottery ticket, but his daughter would. And he said to her one day, he said, you know, the chances of winning the lottery are, and it's some astronomical number, it's millions upon millions to one, yeah? And he goes, and you say to me, well, somebody's got to win, Dad. And then I tell you, the chances of being struck by lightning is about 10 times greater. And you say, it'll never happen to me, Dad. And it's like, you know, you're 10 times more likely to be struck by lightning than you are, in Florida especially, than you are winning the lottery in Florida on some occasions, you know. And yet we're optimistic. We kind of go, oh, man, you know, this is a good thing. It's going to happen to me. So a lot of people went to California and they panned for gold, and they didn't do so well. They spent money buying the equipment. They had their little plot of land and or stream, and they did what they need to do. One of the things they did to make life a bit easier was they started having these like sieves where they would basically have a frame and they would shovel the stuff in and they would just shake it backwards and forwards, and then the sandy stuff would fall out and just go away, and they'd leave the rocks, and then they'd go through the rocks and look for gold. So it was a way of making things a bit more straightforward. The pan is too slow, so they did this. And then people started mechanizing it, so they started having a water wheel, and then the water wheel went round and round and round, so it would shake this thing backwards and forwards. So it was a labor-saving device. So people started wanting water wheels for various reasons, and the water wheels were just really primitive. They were just like a plank of wood and a plank of wood and a plank of wood, and they stuck into the water, and the water came along and went like that, and it pushed the plank around. And then somebody, I forget his name, Lester Peloton, came up with a revolutionary water wheel. It was like the old one, but it had cups on it. That's what he did. He'd simply put cups on it. So the water came along, and it couldn't just go to the side. It had to turn around on itself and then go downstream. And in making the water bounce back rather than bouncing to the side, it was like bouncing the hammer off the nail. It was like not stopping at the nail. Twice as much force. This water wheel worked twice as well, twice as strong, twice as big a frame. You got more stuff done. That's the guy who made all the money out of the gold rush, because he had a patent on it and he made out like a bandit. He did really well. So sometimes it's the technology rather than the luck that gets you to make a fortune. And so, you know, it's kind of an interesting thing. Just a simple design change like that makes a huge difference to the performance. A person being punched is able to make the duration of the impact 3 times longer by riding the punch. They move away from the punch. How is the force of the punch changed? If the duration is 3 times longer, what happens to the force? So we'll do that. So let's have a look. Person being punched is able to make the duration 3 times longer. So what happens to the force? 3 times stronger, 3 times weaker, no change. There's a whole bunch of assumptions in this, I'll be honest about it. I'll give you another little while, because I'm assuming that change in momentum is kind of fixed either way, which is a bit of a cheat. So I'll give you a few more seconds. Let's stop. Mainly B, a little bit of A, a little bit of C. And yeah, so for a given change in momentum is equal to impulse. So if the two of them have the same change in momentum, which means they have the same impulse, if I have three times the delta t, I have 1/3 the force compared with that one. If the delta t goes up, the force goes down proportionately. So it would be a 3 times weaker, let's have a look, make the duration 3 times longer. If the time is 3 times longer, then the force must be 3 times weaker, assuming the same change in momentum. And shame on me, I didn't make that explicit in the question. But, you know. A person being punched is able to make the duration of impact 2 times shorter. How is the force of the punch changed? So same old. Assuming 2 punches with the same change in momentum, if I can reduce the time, what happens to the force? We'll do 30 seconds on this one. This is a pretty standard one. So let's have a look. What we're saying, mainly A, yeah, and if it's, let's have a look. If I impact 2 times shorter, that's language is a bit rough, isn't it? Half as long is what I'd like to say. So if it's half as long, then it would be 2 times stronger force. Yep, cool. If we're in a test and you're not sure about the language, if it's a technical term, I'm going to leave you on your own. But if it is like 2 times shorter versus half as long, I'll gladly explain that. It's like, I mean, it's not my intent to catch you on that kind of language complexity. So a bit of a line. Collisions. We have objects colliding with each other. And this is where the impetus for this work comes up. We want to figure out what's going on. So what we say is that if forces are internal to the system, and they, in this case they are, the ball and the person, that's the system, there is no change in the system's momentum. So the force of the person on the ball is the same as the force of the ball on the person. And neither one of those is an external force. So there's no net external force, so there's no acceleration, so there's no change in momentum. So consider an astronaut and a rock. Initially, the astronaut holds the rock, so I'm holding the rock. If the astronaut pushes the rock away with a force of 50 newtons, so that's 50 newtons in that direction, then the rock pushes back with a force of 50 newtons. That's the way it works. That's Newton's third law. If the interaction duration time is the same for both, if I'm touching the rock's touching me, so it is, then the magnitude of the momentum change is the same for both, but oppositely directed. So this might be a minus delta P, and that might be a plus delta P. An outside observer sees no net change in momentum of the system because there's no net external force. So they'll see this going that direction and that going that direction, but the system as a whole, the middle bit doesn't change. Now, it's useful for the astronaut because if the astronaut wants to get back to the spaceship, they can move themselves back to the spaceship by throwing the boulder away. So it's useful. But what we can say is the momentum of the system before is equal to the momentum of the system afterwards, not the boulder or the person. The momentum of this guy is clearly different than it was here. He had no velocity, now he's got a velocity. The momentum of this guy is clearly different than it was there. But the total momentum is the same as it was to start with. And we use that over and over again. Okay. I've still got some time. There are 3, so let's have a look. Yeah, okay. Shall we do one of those? Because I don't want to, I feel like I've just left it hanging. Oh, I can't do one of those in this. I'm going to do it down here. I'm just going to show you how it is with numbers. So here we have a 4 kilogram block going at 2 meters per second. And let's say it hits a 2 kilogram block, which is going at 1 meter per second. So it catches up, it hits it from behind. And let's even say that they stick together. I know, why should they stick together? Let's say they stick together. Sorry. So now we have the 4 and the 2, and I want to know the speed after the collision. I can say, oh, the momentum of the system before equals the momentum of the system afterwards. So I say 4 times 2 plus 2 times 1 is equal to 4 plus 2 times v. So that's 8 plus 2, 10 is equal to 6v. So v is equal to 10 over 6, which equals 1.66 meters per second. Isn't that amazing? So I can figure out the momentum of this combination precisely through this. It's a really powerful technique. Well, when they stick together, it's a special kind of collision. There's 3 types of collisions I want you to be able to identify. The first is a so-called elastic, which is like pool balls or billiard balls or gas particles. And in that kind of collision, P final equals P initial. And the weird thing is, a thing called kinetic energy final is equal to kinetic energy initial. The next is a fender bender, where the cars don't stick together, but they crinkle each other. And for that, the P final equals P initial, but KE final does not equal KE initial. And I know that because there's a lot of sound and heat and bending of metal that takes place. Whereas with billiard balls, there's this tiny little, and that's it. You wouldn't even know that anything had happened because the kinetic energy stays in the system. But here, because there's so much bending and heat and everything, the kinetic energy has been converted into heat, and so kinetic energy is not conserved. You had a comment or a question?
Oh, just that I didn't know if KE stood for
Kinetic energy, yeah. And then the third kind of collision is called the perfectly inelastic. It's a special case of the inelastic, and that's where the 2 objects stick together. And so I can think of a rugby tackle or I guess in American football, are you allowed to hold on to the person, or do you just push them backwards?
You tackle them?
When you tackle them, yeah. You can hold on to them?
Yeah, I mean, you hit them and take them down, you hold on to them.
You can hold on to them. So what about, is it the linebackers? There's one group where they're not allowed to grab.
You can't grab him if he's catching the football.
Ah, okay. So in rugby you can hold on to, grab hold and hold on to anybody. So they tend to stay together. Mud pies, if I take one mud pie and stick it to another mud pie, they stay together, yeah? So here, momentum final equals momentum initial, and the kinetic energy final is not equal to the kinetic energy initial. And the special case here is just that the 2 masses at the end are the same. So these are basically the same thing. So the world divides up into elastic and inelastic collisions. How am I doing for time? I'm going to stop in a minute. Yeah, okay. I didn't mean to do that. Let's discard and we'll jump in again, and I'll quickly finish off. So I'm going to fly through this because I'm running out of time on my recording. So a gas molecule collides. Sorry. Gas molecule collides. What type of? Let's have a voice thing on this. Gas molecule collides. What kind of collision is it? Elastic. A paint can is thrown at a wall. What kind of collision is this? It bounces back. It's inelastic. An aircraft lands on an aircraft carrier. Hopefully the two stick together afterwards. If not, it's a very expensive accident. What kind of collision is it? Perfectly inelastic. When they stay together, then it's perfectly inelastic. And then complex collisions. If you have three-dimensional stuff or two-dimensional stuff, they stay together. No biggie. And how does the force exerted on a karate expert's hand compare with the force exerted on the concrete block? Here's something to think about. So the force on the hand equals the force on the block. What do you think? Is it an action-reaction pair? Hand on block, block on hand. Sounds like one. If it is an action-reaction pair, what can you tell me about the two forces? Equal. How come you don't break your hand? Because your hand is stronger than the block. If you karate chop a piece of steel, you'll break your hand, okay? And then how will the impulse resulting from the impact differ if she bounces her hand? That's a bit out of context. So karate expert comes along and she does the chop and stays there. Karate expert comes along and she bounces back. How will the impulse? Greater if she bounces. Change of momentum. The momentum is bigger, so the impulse is bigger. Yeah? Cool. I'm going to stop there. Bit rushed at the end. Sorry about that. I'm going to stop.